All right, you're up, Derek.
Hi, everybody. I'm Derek. I'm a real alcoholic, and I say I'm a real alcoholic. I remember the first time I ever heard that. I was at a meeting in a rehab, the first rehab I ever went to. I thought it'd be my last, but it was my first. I'd never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was a meeting in the basement of this hospital in Laguna Beach, South Coast Medical Center. The year was 1980, and this guy got up and he said, "I'm a real alcoholic." And, my reaction sitting down at the back after that was, who does he think he is? Am I some sort of half-assed alcoholic or something, But I'd never really read the book or understood the book. I'd read it, but nothing really stuck. And, on page 30, more about alcoholism, it says most of us have been unwilling, not just a couple or a few. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. And it goes on to say, no person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Now, I heard that 100 times later on in meetings, but I never knew what it meant. What does bodily and mentally different mean? Well, I'm mentally different in the sense that I suffer, or I used to suffer, from an obsession of the mind that's since been removed, that was condemning me to drink against my will, and I didn't know it. I'm bodily different in the sense that once I take any alcohol into my system, and I cannot not take any alcohol into my system, being a real alcoholic, I tried everything. I suffer from something called the phenomenon of craving. I have little or no control over the amount I take. And to add fuel to the fire, on the second page of the doctor's opinion, I'm also maladjusted to life and in full flight from reality, as Dr. Silkworth put it, maladjusted to life and full flight from reality. So that's the mindset of the alcoholic, and my life is unmanageable because of that maladjusted to life and full flight from reality. And the symptoms of that all appear on page 52. They're called the bedevilments, which means torture of the mind. Can't control my emotional nature, full of fear. And I didn't know any of those things when I first came into AA. I knew very little. And depending on where you land in Alcoholics Anonymous will largely determine what kind of program you're going to be exposed to. And I was unfortunate enough to arrive in a place where, the first man I met said, well, don't worry about the steps in the first year, just don't drink and go to meetings and you'll be okay. And things like meeting makers make it. I'm not decrying meetings by any extent, but in and of themselves, they will not cure you. You can have a broken kneecap and you can sit down at all the meetings in the world and it's not going to fix your broken kneecap. You need a program of action to repair that broken knee if you're going to get well. But I knew none of that. I was born in Dublin in Ireland in 1947, just 2 years after the war had ended, Second World War. And I still remember some of the things about that period. I was born in just right in the center of Dublin, just off James's Street. In Bow Lane, literally the back door of Guinness's brewery. And my grandfather had just passed away. He died as a result of hunger strike because he was jailed during the rebellion. And all of that stuff was pretty much alive at that point in time. Dublin in those days was just an amazingly wonderful place. It had been 20 years since independence, 25 years or something like that. And the country was really, it was a country of bicycles and smells, streets, where Francis Street in Dublin, guys would wander around with beers in the tray and all the open markets and stuff like that. It was a marvelous place to grow up in. My mother, her family had a shop on Wood Quay, which was a very ancient part of Dublin, and they found Viking ruins, all kinds of things underneath it. And somewhere around about the age of 18, I discovered alcohol. And I had grown up as a child with this, I guess they would call it social anxiety today. I would blush uncontrollably, feel, just like I had 17 arms and legs. I can remember being 4 years old and standing by the River Liffey. And in the background, a Guinness tug was coming down. They used to cart the Guinness in tugs down to the pier. And I can remember all this billowing white smoke would go up around the bridge as they'd lower the funnel and go in. And I was standing there looking over at my aunt, and I just remember blushing and whatever. I was only 4 years old. I don't know if something happened to me as a child or before that period, but as far back as I can remember, there was this feeling of awkwardness and just not fitting in. Um, I was a very popular guy. I once I got to know anybody, but in strange circumstances or in public situations, I felt, just really, really uncomfortable. And when I was 18, which was the age when kids started drinking, it was a very ordered society in those days. There wasn't any drugs. People very seldom drank before, the appointed time. And I can remember that feeling when I got that first drink into my system. All of that social anxiety, whatever you want to call it, all of that nervousness, embarrassment, and everything just disappeared. And I felt at home, and that was the elixir. And I don't know if I became a certain kind of hard drinker and progressed into a real alcoholic. I think I might have been for a while, but my drinking was definitely, I was always the last person at parties and stuff like that. I went to college in Dublin, went to university, studied architecture, left college after about 3 years, decided to be a draftsman, designer, whatever. Worked in London, worked in Europe. And drinking was going on now on pretty much on a daily basis. It was the 60s. It was a very exciting time in London. And I would work at odd jobs and stuff like that, or work for a few months or whatever, and then just drink. And it was a party scene. Everything was just crazy. And I remember giving myself this kind of statement that, like, this is my pretend life, my real life is going to begin later. So I'm just going to have fun. And the fun consisted of daily drinking, and there was a lot of fun. It really was. I loved to drink. I loved the smell of pubs. I loved all the whole ceremony associated with it, the amber bottles and the colors and all that went with it, and the feeling of that buzz you get as you were getting drunk, and just the crazy times, and the whole society was being liberated from this father knows best society. It was a wonderful, invigorating time, and I could go on and tell you stories about my drinking and everything else like that. Arriving up in London and going to New York and all the rest of it. But there was one situation. I remember befriending a guy called John O'Toole in London, and John ran the Grosvenor Hotel bar, and he would always get passes to all the clubs in London and stuff like that. And I began to call him Disaster O'Toole because he always had a fatal flaw. And one day he said to me, we met these two girls who came from Buenos Aires, and they were on some student package or whatever for a couple of weeks. And after they left, John said, he says, Derek, you'd love Buenos Aires. This is the way it always started. And I said, oh, I would. He says, yeah. He says, fabulous place. He says, my brother was down there. He said, we should go there. Next thing I knew, we were on a ship out of Spain called the Enrico C. I still remember the name, but sailing, I woke up drunk in Spain. I hear this donkey braying in Barcelona, and next thing I know, we're on this ship, and we're heading to Buenos Aires, and we go through Gibraltar, stop at Lisbon, stopped at Rio, all the areas, Montevideo, and this was when Juan Perón was in power, and we didn't speak any Spanish, and we got to meet Nazis on the boat in those days. That was, there was a lot of German trade going on to Argentina, and we got there to stay there, and we were almost killed there. Thousands of people were disappearing, and John and I learned how to speak up to 10 in Spanish, and that was about the only Spanish we could figure out. And the problem was we had drank so much on the ship that we didn't have any money to get back, So we were in this dilemma. So John said, I said to John, let's go to the Irish embassy. They might know something. So we go to the Irish embassy, and as Providence would have it, one of the young attaches at the embassy had gone to my college. And I said to John, we'll go north. We'll go take a train up through Argentina into Bolivia, and we'll go over the Andes from there, and go up along, and that was it. So they gave us the names of all these monasteries where these Catholic priests were. And he said, you can stay with them. So we had these addresses. So we addressed in the first one actually was didn't happen until we got to Peru. So the train kept getting worse and worse and worse, and changing trains. And eventually we were in this wooden train going up across the northern portion of Argentina with women with bags over their, white sacks of chickens, guys with guns, and they're all chewing cocoa leaves. And it was a crazy ass situation. We got into Bolivia, and there was another revolution going on there. There was a guy, another Nazi, who I didn't know at the time, but he was known as the Butcher of Leon, and he had wanted to start a Nazi party in Bolivia. So one of the guys got shot. We were smuggled up and stayed with the Indians up in the high plateau in Bolivia for about 3 months until it was safe to come down. And they were Quechuas. They speak a dialect different to Spanish, totally different language. Traveled over the Andes, and what later became known as the Road of Death. It was just unbelievable. 10,000-foot drops off this sheer precipice side of the mountains, and just a dirt road where, these buses would just scraping the edges off the side. And life went on like that. I got into Baltimore. I was an illegal immigrant at that time, just had a tourist visa. I started working there. Within 2 weeks, I was over in Vancouver visiting my parents, who were visiting my in-laws. And drinking was taking a more and more exhilarating part of my life. In '79, I eventually became I needed to get a visa, so I got married to this girl on the West Coast to get a visa, green card deal. And she went to Ireland after the marriage to study Irish folk music, and I went to California, to work in this brokerage business. And it was just a crazy living life that got worse and worse and worse and worse. I had this moment when I was living in Baltimore. I think it was about 1976. I think I went to an AA meeting or something, because I have vague memories of being in some room or other, but that's about it. But I began to take stock of my life and ask myself, Derek, what are you good at? It's about time your real life began. And I said to myself, sales, you're good at sales, Derek. So I went to this agency called Sales World. And the guy says, well, you haven't sold anything. And I said, well, give me a shot. I'm good. So he said, well, there's an interview going on for a sales engineer with a company called Joy Manufacturing. I didn't know what the heck that was. And they manufacture big centrifugal air compressors and mining equipment and all that kind of stuff. So we drove up to somewhere in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. And I'd had a couple of beers, and we got to the interview area, and the guy said outside, he says, if you pass this interview, there'll be 5 more interviews, and that's it. And I said, oh, no problem, I'll get it first time. He looked at me like I was crazy. So I walk into this room, and there's a table with about 5 or 6 guys sitting behind it. And the chief guy was a sales engineer, a guy called Scudder. I thought his name was Scudder. And they asked me all these pleasantries, and conversation goes back and forward for about 10, 15 minutes. And then they came to the $64 question. They said, Derek, tell me, why is it you want to be a sales engineer with Joy Manufacturing? And I said, well, Dave, I said, some people when they're 14, they want to be dentists and nurses. And when they're 15, they want to be doctors. And when they're 13, they want to be carpenters or whatever. And I said, ever since I was 2 years old, I wanted to be a sales engineer with Joy Manufacturing. The place just burst up, and I got the job. And that was a 9-month piss up, of the like of which I'd never seen before in my life. It was just, I was sent up to a place called Buffalo, where I got a DUI. I remember passing out at one of the lunch meetings, but everybody was drunk. Then I went to Michigan City, where I learned more about these compressors. Then off to Vermont, where I learned about blasting equipment. I didn't tell them any previous experience I might have had in that area on my background. But anyhow, I got transferred out to California, and I knew this was it. I had this feeling in my gut that my life was going to finally begin in California, and to a large extent it did. I ran into a guy called Noel Fleming at a pub called the Irish Pub, or Muldoon's Irish Pub. Now, Muldoon's Irish Pub was Irish in name only because it was owned by a Jewish guy and managed by a Mexican, but it was Muldoon's Irish Pub. And I had my seat in the corner, and I was making all kinds of money in the brokerage business at this point. And I bought a house in Dana Point, and my drinking, was really every day. And I was one of these grandiose drunks now that would buy drinks for everybody and just make an idiot out of myself. And of course, in those days, I had to look good. I was 40 pounds underweight. I mean, I'm 180 right now. I was 140 pounds. And I decided I needed to look good. So I got a hairpiece, and, it looked like a squirrel's nest on my head or something, And I was sitting there on the bar, I remember, and I was getting drunk, I was drinking my Jameson. And, I put my elbow up to the bar, and my elbow missed the bar, and the hairpiece was attached by clips, no tape here, and tape here, and I think it was tape here, and a clip at the back. when I dropped like this, the hairpiece flipped over my face. And I went, holy shit, I'm blind. I fell on the ground, and made a total ass of myself, Took me 2 weeks to summon up the courage to get back in there again. And one night I got locked in the bar because I fell asleep in the toilet with my pants around my knees, and they forgot I was there, and I woke up in the morning and I'd been drinking behind the bar, and I was passed out. But I was such a good customer that there was no problem with it. So, that was my drinking stories. And finally, I was afraid. I lived in Dana Point, and Laguna Beach is up along the coast. And it took about 20 minutes to drive back, and I got another DUI. And so I'd sleep in the office, on a sofa, and the markets opened up about 5 a.m, like currency markets, and then the stock market opens up about 6 on the West Coast, 3 and 9 on the East Coast. So you had to be in there early. And I used to drink with this guy called George, and George came in, and I was half asleep, and I woke up, and I felt awful. And he looked at me and he said, Derek, you look terrible. Why don't you do something? And he said, well, you can clean yourself up. So I went to the bathroom, and I remember this girl, Jeannie, I was going out with. And again, I met this girl in Muldoon's. And, after I'd gone out with her, I saw this really attractive girl doing Muldoon's, and I tried to chat her up. And after about 15 minutes, she said to me, don't you recognize me, Derek? She said, I'm Jeannie. And I said, God, what happened to you? You look great. She said, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to South Coast Medical Center. Maybe you should try it out too. And that stuck in my head. And that morning, when I looked in the mirror, I felt that awful sense of emptiness, that total empty feeling inside, that feeling of, just being lost, that horrible, awful, desperate feeling. And physically, I looked terrible. I mean, my eyes were red. And I remember getting in and going down to that place, and I checked myself in there. And that started my journey into Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I said, the first guy I ever met became a sponsor. And, I had read the book, and we didn't worry about the steps for that first year. And I went to meetings and heard all kinds of things like meeting makers make it and stuff like that. And that's one of the problems that I see in AA after I look back on these years, is that, the newcomer's arriving at a meeting and he has no idea what this deal is about if he hasn't heard of Alcoholics Anonymous before. He doesn't know the first thing about it. And he hears all kinds of different stories, don't worry about, meetings, all this type of stuff. And I stayed sober based on that situation. As regards working with others, if I look back on it, consisted of me telling somebody else, or picking them up to go to an AA meeting. That was the deal. Oh, this is a great meeting. Let's go to that meeting. And if I wanted to work with somebody who's a newcomer, I'd invite them to a meeting, and I'd pick them up. I'd pray occasionally, and that was the extent of my program. And somewhere around about 83, 82, 83, I got a business opportunity from a fellow I used to work with no, and he was living up in Cape Cod, and he said, look, I'm buying the franchise in the Miami office. He says, I'd like you to go down there and get the guys all motivated. He says, if you agree to come on board, he says, I'll give you 25% of the company. And that was a hell of a deal. So he said, if you want to discuss it, come on up to Boston. So I flew up to Boston, and he was out on the Cape. And I remember sitting in that airport at the bar. I was drinking a Perrier, and I had another Perrier or some sort of sparkling water, whatever it was. And the next thing I knew, I was drinking a vodka and tonic. Strange mental blank spot that the book talks about that precedes the first drink. I don't even remember ordering it. And of course, I had another, and I was waiting for a little private plane to take me over to Cape Cod. And I stopped after that, flew over to Cape Cod, had plenty more on the way back, and drank for about 2 weeks. I figured I might as well get some bang for my buck, and went back to meetings. And at the meetings, I hear well, nobody held you down and poured it down your neck. That was the response I got. Nobody said, you have an obsession of the mind and a physical allergy and you're maladjusted to life and full flight from beyond. I didn't know anything about anything like that. And you could stop if you wanted to, or some of the statements I heard. So I had nothing to go by. At the end of that year, end of '83, I started back into my situation. But now an amazing thing happened. After about 90 days, I found myself drunk again, and I could give myself no reason for it. And I became a 30, 60, 90 days kind of guy at meetings. I had more chips than a fish and chip shop, And at the end of '83, I ran into a fellow called Chuck C. Chuck C wrote a new pair of glasses, and he was not feeling too well at that point in time, but a group of us used to go up to his house in Laguna Beach. And he was a beautiful man. And he died at the end of '84, I think it was. And I was so drunk, I remember getting a call for his funeral arrangements being made, that I couldn't attend the funeral. And I still remember the fellow's voice, and he says, Derek, it's Chuck's funeral, you gotta come, and I couldn't make it. And it went on like that, getting progressively more and more worse until somewhere around about the end of the '80s, getting into 1991. I had taken to go to a recovery home called Duffy's that was in the north end of the Napa Valley, and I'd been there 2 or 3 times. And I remember, just sitting at home and just in this awful state. And I had a .357 Colt Python, and I remember loading the bullets into that gun and putting it down beside me. And I had a half a bottle of vodka or something left, and I had some of that white powder you all know so well. And I thought to myself, this is it. I've tried everything. I threw the big book away. I threw the Bible across the room. I said, God, if you were only, I've tried everything to try and find you, not there. And the next thing I knew, the door opened and a man walked into my apartment. I don't know how this happened. Maybe I called him, but I don't think so. And the door was open, which was strange. And he just walked in with his wife, Moira. And Brian was from Ireland. He was from Antrim and used to live in Dublin. And he took in the scene. He took the gun away. They piled me into the car and took me down to Duffy's. And I remember arriving there and Duffy looking at me and saying, not you again. And that, the detox wasn't too bad. And a few days later, for some reason, I found myself just walking out towards the back of Duffy's. And old Duffy had a grotto out there. And in the grotto was God could and would if he were saw. And I was sitting out there despondent, and there was a mountain called Mount St. Helena's. It's the north end of the Napa Valley, and great vineyards all around. And I remember looking up at Mount St. Helena and thinking to myself, maybe if I climbed that mountain, I'd be like Moses. I'd get these tablets or some magic cure or whatever the heck it was. And as I sat there, lost in a despair so crushing, it was unbelievable. There was a darkness, I couldn't even do suicide. I looked down, and suddenly out of nowhere, I saw this squirrel come out, and it was just eating an acorn, and then it would run away with the acorn and then pick up another acorn and come back again. And out of nowhere, this thought came to me that the squirrel was only taking enough acorns for one winter. And it was October. I looked up at the trees and the leaves were falling. And out of nowhere came this thought, Derek, you never saw a tree that said, I froze my ass off last year. I think I'll hang on to my leaves this year. No, it was trusting. It was trusting that the leaves would be replenished when the spring came. And the squirrel was trusting that it would take just enough nuts for one winter and the spring would come. And out of nowhere came this thought that season followed season. There was an order in the universe. And I thought to myself, there has to be a power. There must be a power. Somewhere behind all of this, there must be something. And in that moment also, I realized that people have been telling me who God was since I was that high, And what I came to the awareness was, if I could get rid of these things in myself, then that power would disclose itself to me. And it was like dear divine something. And it was this flicker suddenly of like someone turned on a small light. There was just a glow, a little fire was lit. And I said to myself, I'm determined. I said, I'm going to find that guy who told me about the obsession of the mind, because I'd never heard that before. And I'm going to work with him. And when I get out of here, and I'm going to work these steps, I'm going to find someone who knows how these steps work, and I'm going to go through it with them like I've never gone through with anything. And I was totally and completely committed. And I got out of there, walked over to this house, drove over to this house in Sacramento where a guy called Jim Wright lived, and he had worked with a fellow called Michael. And Jim started to take me through this process. And he started to describe things and, the obsession, the recurring, persistent idea that's more powerful and doesn't respond to reason or reasons. He said, Derek, you're drinking against your will and you don't know it, And suddenly I realized that if I had an obsession to drink, I understood for the first time what hopelessness meant. I never understood that before. I understood that I was condemned because I had an obsession of the mind that was mentally different. I was condemned to drink against my will, even though I didn't want to drink. And I thought it was just a matter of drinking, having a real strong desire to not drink was sufficient, because I'd heard in all the meetings, just don't take the first drink and you won't get drunk. And I thought my powerlessness was over the second drink. I never realized my powerlessness was over the first drink. And once I saw that I had this obsession of the mind, that was choosing for me, I wasn't choosing to drink. And once I started to drink and I couldn't not drink, then the phenomenon of craving was going to kick my ass and I couldn't control the amount I took. And for the first time, I realized why I needed God, because I'd heard all kinds of people who were sober, who, didn't have any God in their life or whatever. But as a real alcoholic, I needed to find the spiritual solution. I needed to find God. And now at last, I believed there was something. And now at last, I realized that I was hopeless. And I realized also that my liquor was just a symptom. The booze was just a symptom of a mental situation. And along with that, I had all the stuff on page 52. And I'll read these for you because these are the symptoms of alcoholism. And the way you diagnose an illness is by its characteristic symptoms. And so if you wanted to look at alcoholism, you have to look at the alcoholic when they're not drinking, not when they are drinking. Because after all, anybody's insane when they're drinking, If you really want to get the symptom of alcoholism, look at the alcoholic when he's not drinking. And here's the symptom. We were having trouble with personal relationship. Of course I was. Are you? We couldn't control our emotional natures. I couldn't control my emotional nature. My emotions controlled me, We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living, We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. And Jim said, Derek, he said, make a list of people you've been of real help to. It shouldn't take you long, And that was alcoholism, And the reason I was drinking, was to shut off that kind of feeling, That was the thing that worked. And now I had for years believed that the alcohol was the problem. Well, it is a problem, it certainly kill you, but it's not the real problem. It's the symptom of the problem. The real problem is the mental problem that goes on. All this stuff, whatever happened in my childhood, whatever, this feeling of maladjusted to life, full flight from reality. We went on, and I remember taking the third step, because I had come to believe there was something. And the most amazing things started to occur, as I really got ready to take that second step. I started, even at that point in time, Jim had impressed upon me, if we go through the doctor's opinion, you got to take somebody through the doctor's opinion. He said, you're teaching to learn. And he said, well, when we go through Bill's story, you got to take somebody through Bill's story. And in that way, you'll know whether you really know it and whether you cut yourself down or not, because you start teaching it to somebody else. And when we got to this, towards this third step, as I began to get closer and closer to this, and we went through in detail on the book, and I was helping somebody else to pick up what I had learned, these things happen, which are the premises of these first two steps. It says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer, it's God. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. And I did. I became less and less interested in myself. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, and I started to feel that power flow into me, as we enjoyed peace of mind, and I did enjoy peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, hope was born here. We began to lose our fear. We became conscious of his presence. We began to lose our fear of today. We began to lose our fear of tomorrow. We began to lose our fear of hereafter. We were reborn. And that all of that happened to me, And then I remember getting down on my knees with a woman who was kind of a sponsor to me at the time also, who, kind of guided me around because I was suffering from withdrawals and, just very shaky. And I remember taking that third step and that feeling, that I was on the right path. And I had the curious feeling, just like Jim and more about alcoholism, that my drinking problem was relieved, as in fact it proved to be later. And then we started in on the fourth step. And the fourth step was done in a way that had a depth to it that I'd never, ever believed possible. We look at people, principles, and institutions with whom we are angry. A lot of people say with whom we're resentful, but whom we are angry. And anger is defined as a strong feeling of displeasure directed at a person or object. So I was to go back through my life, and I was to look at people and ask myself, what people did I have a strong feeling of displeasure against throughout my life, and make a list of those people, and do the same thing with institutions and with principles. I mean, the government, the president, the IRS, taxation, school systems, Institute of Marriage, all sorts of things got listed here, And Jim explained to me, he says, the second column is an action statement. You were looking for the action these people took to you. What action did they take, real or imagined, to create in you a feeling of displeasure directed at them? And this is where you get blood and guts. You just let it all out. And I did. And then the third column asking what's affected, and then going into the fourth column and putting out of our mind the wrongs others have done, looking for our own mistakes. We resolutely look for our own mistakes, where we're being selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened. This comes up over and over and over again on the steps. And making a list. Where in my thoughts was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened with this person? Where in my action was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened with this person? Where in my thought, word, what spoken words did I insult this guy in any way? Did I whatever? And this took a long time for this kind of depth. And when that was completed, there was a fear inventory, that went on. And we're not talking about just fears of spiders or something like that. We're talking about the deep emotional issues, these kind of beliefs that are developed inside us. I had fear of being a failure. I remember my father saying, who are you to think you could do that? and that filled me with a sort of a rage. And it didn't manifest in a career type situation. I just wanted to make money. I proved to the world I was important. This was the kind of attitude I had. And the result was I never really developed much of a career. I just became a stockbroker or a commodity broker. I suppose that's a career, but for me, it was just about making money. It wasn't about the love of something or anything else like that, although it was fun and, all those kind of things. And then there was a sexual inventory, that went into, 17 questions, most of us need an overhauling here. And then the formation of the sexual ideal after that for a future sex life. At a depth that I never believed possible, instead of the 10-minute thing in my fifth step, which was, in Denny's or somewhere. My fifth step took 72 hours over a period of 6 or 7 or 8 days as we went through every single situation. And I tell you, when I got out of that fifth step, that fifth step is not about getting rid of your stuff. It starts off on the top of the chapter Into Action. We're trying to get a new attitude and a new relationship with our creator and to discover the obstacles in our path. And I was trying to get a new attitude and a new relationship with my creator and discover the obstacles in my path. And I did after that. There was a sense of a presence that came into my life that was indescribable. And in those days, I used to drive from a little town called Davis outside Sacramento across the mountains over to the Napa Valley. And Duffy's used to have these sobriety weekends where you could go and spend a weekend there. And I'd do that and I'd work with people. And on the way over, you'd go through these windy roads. That was just beautiful countryside. And I'd stop sometimes at the side of the road and I'd climb over a fence. I don't know why I do this. And I'd make a cairn out of rocks. And I'd pray there. And I can still remember it. I would get so emotional. I would just cry because this obsession had been removed from me. And I had tried so hard all my life to get rid of this, and I just couldn't. I'd been 11 years a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, going to meeting after meeting after meeting, and nothing was going on. I just getting worse and worse and worse. I did most of my serious drinking as a member of AA, and the group that I was with were betting, how long I'd stay alive. There was nobody with a solution there. It wasn't a solution. It was just go to meetings and just don't drink. That was the message I got. And this was entirely different. And I was on fire. I was on fire. And at the end of going through that step, the promises of the fifth step are just remarkable. They're listed on page 76. Read it for you. Once we have taken this step withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. And that was a big shift for me, to look the world in the eye, because I instead of this moping down business, I was looking at people directly. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. I wasn't coming home and turning on the TV or the radio or whatever. I was coming home and being alone and feeling this aloneness. And in a weird kind of way, I felt I wasn't alone. There was now a presence in my life, and it was tangible. It was really, really tangible. Our fears fall from us. Amazing. We can begin to feel the nearness of our creator. And I did. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. And the way you know something is by experiencing it. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. The obsession is gone. We feel we're on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And that's exactly what happened in my life. And it was even before this period, I started doing book studies. In fact, the first book study I ever did that had a large group was down near Steve's place, right? Actually in Steve's hometown there near Concord, at the Alano Club, right beside the bridge there that goes over the estuary that comes in. And that was, I think, in '92. Little did I know, the way things unfold in your life afterwards. I went on through 6 and 7. It was 6 and 7, it was just ask God to remove your shortcomings and stuff like that. And I sensed there was more to it than that. But, I went through that routine. I made a list of people, you know, started to make my amends. And there were into three categories: those I was ready to make now, those I was ready to make later, and those I was never ready to make. No bloody way was I going to make those amends. So somewhere during this and around this period, there was by the way, I was living in my office now at this point in time, and I had no shower, no bathroom. That was all down the stairs, down the hallway. And I would go to the gym to shower and do all that kind of stuff. And I was so emaciated at 140 pounds, I could only swim about one lap, and I even wore a top and a wetsuit, you know, because I was just a mess. And pain in the ass in those days, because I'd be sitting there thinking you're looking good, you know, and some Arnold Schwarzenegger guy would stand beside you. And it took a lot of guts to go into a place like that, because I beginning to feel alive again, you know, the self-conscious feeling. But they had a 1 mile swim at Lake Berryessa at somewhere in 1992. And I participated in it. And I swam that 1 mile. I think I came in towards the end, obviously, maybe second last or something. But I finished the 1 mile swim at Berryessa, and I got out with tears in my eyes, because, you know, I knew God had made that possible, and God was in my life. And this wasn't some far away God. This was a real living presence. The book talks about conscious contact, and that's what I'm talking about. You know, the best way I can describe it, you know, if you've been in a swamp all your life, you know, and somebody says, watch out for the swamp, you're going to have no code of reference. What swamp, you know, like asking a fish, watch out for the water, you know. And when I made this awareness and had this contact, it's like I'm out of the swamp. And for the first time, when we got to step 10, it was continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, not if they crop up, but when they crop up, and they do, we make amends quickly and work with somebody. And, you know, it's like walking along this path on solid ground. And when you feel your feet sinking, you know you're in the swamp. And that's the way it was with this conscious contact. I get a sense of when I was walking into trouble. And I was able to, oh, okay, you know, make amends for this, make amends for that. And I had a design for a living now that worked, you know. I had a real pattern of life. And I started, one thing led to another. I started with a board and working with one guy, and then there was two guys, and then there was three guys. And before I knew where I was, there was book studies going on, all kinds of stuff. And one of the things I noticed at my home in Calistoga, but I moved down there, and we had a beautiful home on about 20 acres down there overlooking the Napa Valley. And one thing I noticed, people started to come, and I would work with them for a while, and they would, and most of the days, that's what I did for about 10 years, just working with people day in, day out. And I traded the markets in the evenings and mornings or whatever. So I could devote most of my time to that kind of work. And my awareness and consciousness of this presence in my life just grew exponentially. And I noticed when some of these guys would come, the real alcoholics who were really bad with the obsession, and I'd spend 3 or 4 hours with them working with them, and they'd get lifted up. And the problem was, of course, the obsession was still there, but they had hope. And I'd say to them, look, don't worry if you drink again, because, you know, the miracle is when you don't drink, and we're only starting this off. And then, you know, on their way home or the next day, they'd drink, and they'd lose a day or so, they'd come back again. And I began to think about this, and I was living with a couple of people at the time. Nancy was a girl I lived with. I'd taken her, she was living in someplace else, and we didn't have a relationship or anything like that, sexual relationship or anything like that, but she was just a roommate. And I said to her, you know, if I could get these people away for a week and really take them through the whole process and get enough light into them, maybe we could blast this obsession, you know, away. And that gave rise to the Sierra workshops. And so in 1994, I did the first of what was to become a yearly event, Sierra Workshop. The week before Easter, we would start on the Saturday before Easter and finish on Easter Sunday. And the theme was always the same: a vision for you, resurrection, your own resurrection. And the first study, the first workshop we had up there had 14 people. And it was miraculous, some of the things that started to happen. Talk about the presence of God being manifest in a place. It started to occur. I mean, things really started to happen, you know, woohoo stuff. I won't go into some of the details, but it really did. Miraculous demonstrations of that power began to occur. And people were just blasted away, not the least of which was myself, you know, because this power was just operating through me and I was just letting it out. And in the most amazing way, people became transformed. And the second year, Sierra 95, we had, I think, about 60 people. And by Sierra 97, 98, 99, there was almost 100 people coming from all over the country. And it was remarkable, some of the cases and friends. In fact, I'm flying up to San Francisco on the 6th or 5th of July of August. I got a call from a guy who I performed the wedding for him. He and his wife, Carol, and Kevin Boss. I haven't talked to them since that day, that wedding. That's 25 years ago. And he's celebrating 30 years on the 6th. So I'm flying up on the 5th to give him a token. I'll give him mine. And, you know, that's the way it's been. And, you know, out of all of this back in 98, I was praying for somebody to come into my life. And God saw fit to bring somebody into my life. And it was this person, you know, and she was younger than I was. And I said, you know, this doesn't seem, you know, and she said, well, she said, you always said age doesn't matter and stuff like that and whatever. And I did. And it didn't work out. It moved me down to San Diego here. My daughter was born in 98. And we'd lived together for a year. She did studies with me and everything else like that. But she was, let's say she was not a well person. I think I married. That doesn't really matter. But it really caused a lot of problems in my life. I love children and, you know, divorces, separation, all this kind of stuff. It was a very bad period. And the sponsor I had at the time really was instrumental in all of this. He came down and lived with me for a year and really was very jealous, I think, of my own success. And you had to pay him to stay with you and everything else like that. It was a very sick scene. And the fallout of that really was very, very hurtful and really knocked me down for years. I went into a very deep depression after that. And I was down in San Diego away from the group and everything else like that. And I often look back at it and think, you know, if only or whatever. But life has a way of working out the way life works out. And that pain and that stuff I went through, you know, the darkness works with the light, you know, in this dimension. So, you know, the so-called evil that we fear it can be a great teacher too. And it caused me to look deeper into myself and see certain defects that I had that I don't think I would have been able to see had I not gone through that experience, you know. And God knows what he's doing. I mean, when I got married in an ashram in Northern California, in the home of a man called Swami Kriyananda, who was a direct disciple of Yogananda. I taught classes up there on a yogic approach to overcoming addiction. I could go on and tell you all kinds of things that happened through that experience, you know. And if I have any kind of a religion today, it is the awareness that God lives within us. And we are attributes of God. We're not just a part of God, we're attributes of God. And by an attribute, I mean, you know, my toe is a part of my body and I could get rid of my toe, but I'd still be here. Well, an attribute is a part of the whole without which the whole can't be the whole. In other words, no cell, no body, no acorn, no oak tree, no God, no me, no God. We're an attribute of God. That's the remarkable thing. God isn't somewhere out there. God is deep down within. And the book talks about this on page 55, I think it is. It says, actually, we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. And all that stuff is the fourth step stuff that's blocking the awareness of God deep down within. It says, we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we had for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality, God, deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that it may be found. Now, and that has brought such amazing peace to me, because I grew up as a Catholic and God was over here and always out there. And I was going to be judged for everything, you know, me homa, me maxima club, you know, it was all this awful upbringing. And Ireland in those days was very, very Catholic. It was a governmental form, really. And you know, that just dropped away. And today, this power constantly reveals more and more of itself as the years have rolled by. And you know, I've come to see that the life that's living me is the divine, and the life that's living me is living Kevin. It's living Steve. It's living everybody that we're talking to. It's living the plants, the trees, and everything else like that. And it's one life. And if we look around our world today, you know, we're under attack because the balance between this good and evil has got totally out of whack right now. And we're seeing it. We're seeing, really, in my opinion, a takeover of our planet, you know, by very, very corrupt and evil forces. And our very meetings and everything else like that may be threatened in the future. And we need to express this in all our affairs, you know, in all our affairs, not just in some. We need to bring this light out. And this is an experience that everybody must have. And so many people in AA skirt along the surface and miss the depth of this, miss this, you know, the consciousness of the presence of God and that expanding awareness of that presence in my life is the single most important thing. And that's what AA is about. You want to know the spiritual part of the program, all of it. You want to know what character defects, anything south of a lie is a lie. And when you make the forbidden statement to think God is separate from you, then the character defect is you. You're the character defect, and everything you're doing is a defect. You know, you want to come into this awareness, and just the joy of it's just indescribable. And you know, it's enabled me to face calamities of all sorts that I'd never been able to face. 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, given 6 months to live. I went to the doctor. You know, the oncologist says we're going to take, I had a 7.5 centimeter tumor on my left kidney. It metastasized through my lungs into my lymph nodes. And he said, we're going to take out your kidney and we're going to start chemo. I said, well, I tell you what, doc, you can get your kidney out if you like. I'm hanging on to mine. And as regards the indiscriminate poisoning of my whole system with chemo, that's insanity. Why would I do that and destroy my immune system? So I went back to the steps, changed my diet, and here I am. So I don't doubt God's power at all. Anyhow, that's enough out of me, guys. Thanks for letting me share, and thanks for the joy of spending this time with you and sharing this with you. I want to close, though, and just tell you there's an amazing, there are promises after all these steps. But one of the great promises comes in the final situation on step 12. And you'll find that promise listed on page 153, 3 lines down, or 2 lines down. And it says, then you will know, it's in the chapter of Vision for You, then you will know what it means to give of yourself, that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself, because you see the divine principle within them. And the divine principle with them is above the personality, which is always ever changing. Every personality is different, but divine principle remains the same. This wonderful term, namaste, I behold the light in you. I behold the light in you. So, namaste. Thank you.